global economy is not a machine. It is a living, breathing organism with a memory, and that memory is screaming a warning we have chosen to forget. We stand atop a fragile pyramid of debt, trust, and complex financial promises, believing it to be a permanent structure. But history shows us this pyramid has a 100-year collapse cycle, a secular shift where every promise is broken, every trust is betrayed, and the entire financial order resets. This isn't a prediction of doom, it is a pattern, a recurring fever in the body of global finance. The last Great Reset began in the 1920s and culminated in the chaos of the Great Depression and World War II. It was a cascade of failures, a chain reaction of bad debt and broken promises. We are now precisely 1 century from that last catastrophic event. The stage is set for a drama we've seen before. A system built on sand cannot withstand the storm. Let's go back to the last days of the Roaring Twenties. The mood was euphoric. New technologies like the automobile and radio were transforming society. The stock market was a national pastime, with everyone from tycoons to janitors buying on margin. Credit was cheap, the future was limitless, but beneath the glittering surface, the foundation was rotting. Income inequality reached staggering heights. The top 1% held nearly 25% of the wealth. A massive web of interlinked debt connected banks, corporations, and international markets. The global economy was a house of cards waiting for a breeze. That breeze came on October 24th, 1929, Black Thursday. Panic selling began, but the real collapse was yet to come. The market crash was just the first domino. It triggered a far more insidious disease, a debt deflation spiral. As asset prices collapsed, loans were called in. People and businesses who had borrowed against their now worthless stocks were wiped out. They couldn't pay. Banks stuffed with these bad loans started to fail. Not just a few. Over 9,000 American banks failed between 1930 and 1933. The life savings of millions vanished into thin air. This wasn't just an American problem, it was a global contagion. The credit of the world simply froze. The past never remains buried. The response from governments and central banks was, in many cases, catastrophic. They raised interest rates to defend the gold standard, strangling what little economic breath remained. They implemented protectionist tariffs like the Smoot-Hawley Act, which vaporized international trade. They focused on balancing budgets while their citizens starved. They were applying the remedies of the 19th century to a 20th century crisis. It was a colossal failure of imagination. The economic collapse fueled social despair, which in turn gave rise to extremism and ultimately World War. The old order had to die to make way for the new. A lesson written in fire and blood. In July 1944, as World War II still raged, the architects of the New World Order met in secret at a hotel in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. Their mission was simple and audacious: to design a global financial system that would prevent the cycles of boom and bust, trade war and hot war from ever happening again. They created the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. They pegged global currencies to the US dollar, which was in turn pegged to gold. It was a system built on stability, control, and managed growth. For decades, it worked. The world experienced an unprecedented economic boom. But then we broke the rules. The pattern began to reassert itself. In 1971, President Richard Nixon made a decision that would alter the fate of the world for the next 50 years. He severed the US dollar's last link to gold. The Bretton Woods system was dead. We entered the era of pure fiat currency, money backed by nothing but government promise. This was the single most important financial event of the last half-century. It unleashed unimaginable credit growth. It gave governments a magic credit card with no visible limit. It was freedom from the constraints of reality. But every magic trick has a final act. Fast forward to today. The parallels to the 1920s are not just striking, they are terrifying. We have our own Roaring Twenties, fueled by digital technology and easy money. We have our own staggering inequality. The top 1% now controls over 38% of the world's wealth. We have a global debt pyramid that dwarfs anything in human history. Global debt has reached over $300 trillion. That's over 3 times the size of the entire global economy. We built a skyscraper of IOUs on a fault line. The cracks are already visible. Central banks have become the masters of the universe. For the last 2 decades, they have fought every crisis with the same weapon: printing more money. The 2008 financial crisis, quantitative easing, the COVID-19 pandemic, even more massive quantitative easing. They flooded the system with liquidity, propping up asset prices and kicking the can down the road. They believed they could manage the cycle. They believed they were smarter than their predecessors from the 1930s, but they only made the system more fragile. They have run out of road. The can is now smashed against a wall. The inflation genie is out of the bottle. For the first time in 40 years, we are facing persistent structural inflation. This is not a temporary blip. It is the direct consequence of decades of money printing, combined with deglobalization and supply chain shocks. Central banks are now trapped. If they raise interest rates aggressively to fight inflation, they risk triggering a deflationary debt collapse, just like in the 1930s. If they pause or reverse course, they let inflation run rampant, destroying savings and creating social unrest. There is no painless way out. This is the central banker's checkmate. The first tremors of the collapse are already here. The UK gilt market meltdown in 2022, the failure of several major US banks in 2023, the constant stress in the commercial real estate market. These are not isolated incidents. They are symptoms of the same disease, a financial system that has reached its structural limits, a system that is too interconnected, too leveraged, and too dependent on the illusion of perpetual liquidity. The dominoes are lining up. All it takes is one push, and that push will come from a place most are not watching. The next phase will not be a single event, but a cascade, a chain reaction of failures that moves from the periphery to the core. It begins in the shadow banking system, the multi-trillion-dollar network of non-bank lenders, hedge funds, and private credit firms that now form the majority of global lending. This system is unregulated, opaque, and riddled with leverage. It is the exact same weakness that brought down the system in 1929, just dressed in modern fintech clothing. When a major shadow bank fails, there is no lender of last resort, no FDIC insurance, just a black hole of contagion. The trigger could be a sovereign default. A country like Japan, with a debt-to-GDP ratio of over 260%, suddenly finds it can no longer service its debts as global interest rates rise. Or Italy, with its fragile banking system and political instability. The moment a G7 nation defaults, the entire architecture of sovereign debt shatters. The belief that governments cannot fail evaporates. The rush for the exits will be instantaneous and brutal. The trust will vanish overnight, and trust is the only real collateral. This is where the digital age accelerates the collapse. In 1929, news traveled by ticker tape. In 2024, it travels at the speed of light. The first sign of trouble will be a flash crash in the bond market. Yields on government debt will spike violently as everyone sells at once. This will trigger margin calls on a scale never seen. Trillions of dollars in leveraged derivatives bets, those complex financial weapons of mass destruction, will instantly explode. Pension funds, insurance companies, and sovereign wealth funds will see their balance sheets vaporized. The digital run on the banks will be global and unstoppable. A silent binary panic. Central banks will be powerless. They will attempt to act as they always have by printing more money. But this time it will be like pouring gasoline on a fire. The market will perceive it as an act of desperation, a confirmation that the system is broken. It will fuel hyperinflation in essential goods while asset prices collapse. The worst of both worlds. Stagflation on steroids. The value of cash will evaporate, while the things you actually need, food, energy, shelter, will become prohibitively expensive. The printing presses will only seal our fate. We are sailing into a perfect storm. This is not a theory, it is a pattern. Look at the Weimar Republic in 1923. People needed wheelbarrows of cash to buy a loaf of bread. Look at Zimbabwe in 2008. Look at Venezuela today. These are not anomalies. They are rehearsals for what happens when a currency loses the faith of its people, when the shared hallucination of money's value dissolves, the social contract tears, and civilization itself begins to fray. The real cost is measured in hunger and violence. History's darkest pages are written in worthless currency. So, what happens when the global system seizes up? The first casualty is trade. The complex, just-in-time supply chains that deliver your food, medicine, and fuel will snap. Supermarket shelves will empty within days. The second casualty is energy. Without functioning credit, oil tankers stop sailing, refineries shut down, the lights go out. The third and most dangerous casualty is order. When people are cold and hungry, they do what they must to survive. The police and military cannot be everywhere at once. This is the anatomy of a collapse. It is a logistical and social avalanche. But within this chaos lies a roadmap, a way to navigate the unraveling. The first step is to understand that this is not the end of the world, it is the end of a system. A 100-year cycle is concluding. The patterns are clear. The Roman denarius was debased over centuries. The Spanish Empire drowned in gold from the New World. The British pound sterling lost its hegemony. All empires and their currencies follow the same life cycle: birth, growth, excess, and collapse. We are in the final act. But a new act will always follow. Your survival and prosperity depend on recognizing the phase we are in and acting accordingly. This is not about doom scrolling in fear. It is about strategic awareness. The first rule is to get out of the line of fire. Reduce your exposure to the most vulnerable parts of the system. That means moving wealth out of digital and paper assets that can be frozen, devalued, or wiped out with a keystroke. Get out of sovereign bonds from highly indebted nations. Be deeply skeptical of any complex financial product you don't fundamentally understand. Simplify your financial life. Complexity is the enemy of resilience. The second rule is to own real, productive assets. This is the timeless lesson of every hyperinflation and depression. While paper wealth vanishes, tangible assets retain their utility. Productive farmland, critical energy resources like oil and gas royalties, precious metals that have been money for 5,000 years. These are not investments for getting rich. They are lifeboats for preserving capital and purchasing power when the digital system blinks off. Own things that people need, not just want. Value shifts from the virtual to the physical. The third rule is to cultivate personal sovereignty. This means reducing your dependency on the fragile, centralized systems that are most likely to fail. Learn a practical skill that will be valuable in any economy, from carpentry to medicine. Build a resilient local network of trusted people. Hold some physical cash and gold outside the banking system. Decentralize your life. The more self-reliant you are, the less the storm outside will affect you inside. Your community is your new currency. Your skills are your new resume. We are living through the final years of a grand historical cycle. The 100-year collapse is not a prophecy of inevitable ruin. It is a diagnosis, a warning of the natural conclusion of our current financial path. But by understanding the pattern, you can position yourself not as a victim, but as an observer who is prepared. You can see the tidal wave forming on the horizon and move to higher ground. The collapse of one system is always the birth of another. New technologies, new energy sources, and new monetary systems will emerge from the ashes. The phoenix always rises. The cycle always turns. The key is to be among those who see the turn coming, who understand that the past is not a distant country, but a prelude, that the whispers of 1929 are now roaring in our ears. The global economy will unravel, as it always does, to be rewoven into a new pattern. Your financial survival, your family's security, and your future prosperity depend on one thing: recognizing the pattern and having the courage to act on it before the crowd does. The storm is coming, but you don't have to stand in the rain. If you learned something new today, hit subscribe. There's always more history waiting to be uncovered here on Econ Prime.